Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share this program so that your friends can join in the conversation. Also, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. Even if you're watching this on the other one, flip over to the other one and make sure that you do that. And also make sure you hit the notification button so that you can be alerted as soon as we go live. That way you can share it exactly when the conversations are happening. Now, also would like to encourage you guys to please go to fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. This is in part how we help pay the bills. We offer you, instead of just giving a donation, we give you the opportunity to purchase all sorts of cool Pro 2A swag, t-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies, all sorts of various different things in order to show your support for the Second Amendment. Now, the good thing is every dollar that you spend goes right back into the fight for a right to keep and bear arms. So you're not just supporting the Second Amendment, but you're also looking good while you do it. So that's fpcgear.com. All right, it's that time. It's presidential election time, or at least candidates are starting to introduce themselves to voters and where they stand on various different issues, and in order to kind of position themselves in order to be elected, or at least their party's nominee for president. Now, there are a whole lot of anti-gun candidates running, and we can talk. That's a story for another video. But there's one in particular that I wanted to make sure to alert all of you to, because this is one that, being from the state of California, I have a special, how shall we say, relationship with. Not so much a relationship in that I've ever met this individual or that I've ever I've dealt with this individual because I've worked with this individual, because this individual is homegrown right here in the state of California. Started off as the district attorney in the city of San Francisco, one of the most anti-civil rights, anti-gun cities in the entire country. It's so bad there in San Francisco that there is not one single gun store there in the city of San Francisco. They've literally passed policies that have caused them to all shut down. This individual is also the Attorney General was also the Attorney General for the state of California, and then would eventually be elected senator from California. That's right, you all know who I'm talking about. I'm referring to one Miss Kamala Harris. Now, I just wanted to take some time to kind of help you guys to really get a hold of her anti-Second Amendment bona fides. You guys, you got to understand that, it's not just about the anti-gun rhetoric. It's about what have you done either for or against the Second Amendment and for gun owners. And there are few candidates that are running that have done more to hurt the Second Amendment than Kamala Harris. And so I just wanted to share just a few of those things so that you guys could come to understand why our opposition, or at least my opposition to Kamala Harris, is so great. First of all, there's this program we have here in the state of California called APS. It's the Armed Prohibited Persons System. Now, this is a system that was passed in the early 2000s, and the whole goal behind it was, if someone was not allowed to own a firearm, if they were a convicted felon, if they had a restraining order against them, in particular domestic violence restraining order against them, if they were involuntarily held in a mental health facility, for whatever reason, whatever the legal reasons are that an individual is not allowed to own or possess firearms, they wanted to make sure that those individuals did not have firearms. So what they decided to do was this. They said, okay, we're going to take the list of people who've purchased firearms in the state of California. Now, mind you, we didn't always keep a list of people who purchased firearms in the state of California. And even when we did keep a list, we didn't keep a list for a long time until actually recently of people who actually purchased long guns. So now there's a list of whoever owns guns, or at least whoever's purchased firearms. And then they compare that list to a bunch of other lists of people who aren't supposed to own firearms. For example, people who have a restraining order, people who've gotten a 5150 or an involuntary mental health hold. That's what a 5150 is in California. Individuals who are convicted of certain misdemeanors that are prohibiting crimes. and they would compare those lists. And when they compared them, that together they should be able to come up with a list of people who they know own firearms, supposedly because they purchased them legally, or at least they purchased them during that period of time, and are not supposed to own or possess firearms, meaning they are armed, we know they're armed, and they're prohibited from owning firearms. Well, interesting thing happened when they started to put this list together as Kamala Harris was taking over. In essence, what wound up happening was there were some 20, 30,000 people on this list. And what they found interesting was nobody from the Attorney General's office was doing anything to make sure that these individuals were dispossessed of their firearms. Once again, individuals who aren't supposed to own firearms. Now, there are a few reasons behind a lot of this. One of them was that nobody actually checked to make sure that the database was actually correct, that people who were in the database were supposed to be in the database. In fact, they found that a huge percentage, this is after Kamala Harris left. And by the way, we told Kamala Harris's office that this was the case, that there were a ton of people that were on the list that weren't supposed to be on the list, and yet and still, their names were still on the list. When they actually just recently did a big announcement about the purge, about how many people they were able to get off the list, what they noted in their report was that a huge percentage of them were people who never should have been on the list. It was they either were on there erroneously, or they were on there for a temporary period of time and should have had their names removed. For example, they had a temporary restraining order, right? So you go, if you're in the middle of a divorce and you get a restraining order, or your spouse gets a restraining order, guess what? You are now added to the apps list. But after the divorce, everything is done, the temporary restraining order is lifted, guess what? You can now own and possess firearms again. But they weren't removing people from the apps list. In fact, Kamala Harris's people were going and raiding people's homes, seizing their firearms at gunpoint. And then, there'd be reports in some cases in the news where they had to give the firearms back. While at the same time, the Department of Justice refuses to tell anybody how many times out of how many of these raids they had to do it. Now, even worse, they raided dealer's record of sales, right? That's where basically when you go to buy a firearm, they do what's called a DROS. This is where you do your background check to purchase a firearm in the state of California. You pay a fee for that. So many people were buying guns that they were finding there was a surplus. So instead of refunding that money or lowering the fees, they stole that money. Kamala Harris stole that money in order to take $24 million of it, in order to then go and seize these firearms. They stole it. She stole it. And even with that, they couldn't lower the list. They could not deal with the backlog. They were given that money and they promised within a year, we can get that list down. We can get that list down. And guess what? Within a year, they didn't. They did not address it. Not one. It was sad. So you steal our money. First, let me clarify. You go after people who aren't supposed to be on the list, and you go after and you seize their firearms. Then on top of that, you steal money that's supposed to go towards background checks in order to go after that list, people who are supposed to be on that list and not supposed to have guns, and yet you're still not seizing firearms. You're still not taking guns away from people who aren't supposed to have them. Now, that was just one example. Then there was another example, and there was a lawsuit called Doe v. Harris. Now, this lawsuit had to do with the 1 in 30 requirement or restriction we have in California. In California, you're only allowed to purchase one handgun every 30 days, within a 30-day period. Only one, because they believe that you're going to go buy a whole entire arsenal of firearms at one time. Now, for some reason, I don't know why it's 1 every 30, why it can't be 2 in a 30, or they don't tell you that. They always bring up this example. Well, someone once bought 100 AR lowers at one time. Now, mind you, it's 1 or 100. They couldn't say, well, how about 10 in a 30-day period or 5 in a 30-day period. Not that I'm agreeing that there should be any sort of a rationing like that. But keep in mind, these are the extremes that folks like Kamala Harris here argued. Those are the extremes that she argued, right? Well, there were certain exemptions, right? So if you were an individual who had a federal firearms license, meaning you were an FFL, you were a firearms retailer, if you had that license, and you had a certificate of eligibility, meaning you've already purchased a firearm, then you were exempt, meaning you could purchase more than one firearm every 30 days. Now, one of the FFLs, you guys might recall, is a curio and relic, right? It means that you're a collector, right? Well, the law specifically said if you have a federal firearms license. Well, for years after this law passed, it has always been interpreted that the plain language of the law. The plain language of the law said if you have a federal firearms license and a COE, 1 in 30 doesn't apply to you. Well, Kamala Harris decided out of her own wisdom that, she was going to reinterpret that. Now, she reinterpreted it, and she didn't go through any of the process. Mind you, there is a process that you go through if you're going to change regulations, right? If you're going to change regulations, there's a process. There has to be a public notification. There has to be public hearings. People have to be able to give their input in regards to how this process is done. She didn't do that. She ignored the law, and she just sent letters to firearms retailers and told them, we're changing this interpretation. So if someone comes to you with a curio and relic license, with that FFL, you are not, and there's evidence that they've purchased a firearm, more than one firearm in the last 30 days. You, Mr. FFL, will be held, Mr. Firearms Retailer, will be held criminally liable for if you sell them a firearm. That's what happened. So, needless to say, we filed lawsuit. It was Doe v. Harris. It would eventually be decided as Doe v. Becerra because that's how long it takes to get things through the court process here in the state of California. But in essence, what would wind up happening is that both the lower court and the appellate court in the state of California, this is the funny part, the appellate court in the state of California, the appeals court, said you can't do that. You can't do that, Kamala. You can't do that. You are not allowed to, first of all, you're not allowed to ignore the plain language of the law. And the plain language is what it is. If you have the license and the COE, then you're exempt. That's the plain language. And they tried to argue. She tried to argue, but that would just be absurd. Well, why is it absurd? It's written in the plain language of the law. They're like, it's not what we meant. What had happened was, what was meant was, but completely ignored the fact that this was all part of the legislative findings, that this was all discussed in the forming of the bill and all of that. Completely ignored all that. But not only that, Ms. Harris, you don't get to ignore the law in regards to how you change things. There's also this whole process that you just flat out ignored because you wanted to do what you wanted to do. All because you wanted to make sure that someone who followed the law wasn't able to purchase more than one handgun every 30 days. That's Miss Kamala Harris. Now, here's one other one. You guys will love this one. So there was on the books a law here in the state of California dating back to 1923, which forbid firearms retailers from having the picture of a handgun on the outside of their store. Or no, not even just on the outside. It couldn't be seen from the outside of their store. So, Miss Kamala Harris, mind you, most people didn't pay really any real attention to this law until Kamala Harris's DOJ decided that they were going to fine a firearms retailer for having a picture of a handgun on the outside of his store. Now, mind you, right next to the handgun is a picture of a fully decked out, assaulty looking, I like to say assaulty looking because, it had all of the accoutrements, which would be designated as assault-like by the California Democrat that we see over my shoulder. But all of these things were on it, were right next to it. But that wasn't illegal. But the handgun, oh, how dare you have the evil revolver shown on the outside of your store. So she decided to find them. And so guess what? We sued her again. And guess what? She lost again. Lost again. Because she was so offended by the idea of firearms that she didn't want to even have a handgun. She wanted to enforce, went after a gun store for having the picture of a handgun on the outside of their store. Now, I will also tell you there are a number of other reasons why I have issues with Ms. Harris, up to and including the fact that, well, let's just put it this way. She and her Department of Justice have supported all sorts of anti-gun laws, all sorts of anti-gun legislation, up to and including the banning of semi-automatic long guns with detachable magazines. She supported that. She supported unnecessary posting of signs at firearms retailers. Her DOJ has supported things like red flag gun confiscation laws and the expansion of those laws to include anybody under the sun being able to have your rights taken away. Unrealistic firearm storage laws. You name it, her Department of Justice has supported it. While at the same time, supporting laws that actually have taken criminals, violent criminals, and released them on the streets in the state of California. California, under her watch, has seen the first increase in crime and violent crime in more than 20 years under the watch of Senator Kamala Harris, or at that time, Attorney General Kamala Harris. Now, when she ran for district attorney the very first time, she ran as a law and order, I'm going to go after them and lock them up type of district attorney. And to her credit, she was better than the district attorney that she replaced there in the city of San Francisco. But that's like saying they went from an F- to an F. And then she became attorney general and spent more time suing law-abiding citizens, going after law-abiding citizens, than actually putting criminals behind bars. So, with all of that, I hope that lets the rest of you in the rest of the country understand a little bit more about exactly who Kamala Harris is. Please do not let her law enforcement background fool you. She is a soft on crime senator from California. She was a soft on crime attorney general and a soft on crime district attorney. And most importantly, in all of those cases, she was anti-civil rights. She was anti-Second Amendment. She does not believe in your right to keep and bear arms. She also believes that your other rights, your right to free speech, your right to due process, your right to private property, are all suspect if you are seeking to exercise them in the furtherance of your right to keep and bear arms. That is who Kamala Harris is and why she is not worthy of your support for president. Anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate you guys liking and sharing this program and telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.